The success of Gordon Ramsay we all know today was forged in a fire of pressure and precision under the watchful eye of his mentor, Marco Pierre White. For 16 hours a day for 2 years, Marco instilled an obsession within Gordon for perfection and discipline. However, mentorship in the elite culinary world often comes with an expiration date, and as Gordon's ambition grew, so did too the tension between master and student. So when Gordon fled Marco's kitchen and started becoming a superstar, Ramsay funneled this dynamic into his apprentice, sous chef and best friend, Marcus Wareing. Together, they single-handedly introduced a modern wave of culinary refinement to the London food scene. However, as Marcus developed his own reputation within the Ramsay empire, a bitter rivalry between the two started to build, which eventually led to a £1 million lawsuit and Marcus stating that he would never speak to Gordon Ramsay ever again. But first, if you didn't know, I make weekly documentary videos here on this channel, and it would be awesome if you could drop a sub to the channel so we can keep this YouTube dream alive. My videos are now also up on Spotify, so if you want to watch and listen to videos on the go, feel free to check that out in the description as well. And if you want to watch a prequel to this story, I'd highly recommend watching my video on Gordon and Marco Pierre White's relationship, as it will add some extra context to this video, and it's just low-key one of the best videos I've ever made. But don't worry, I'm going to explain it all anyway. So let's get back into the video. In the late 1980s, Marco Pierre White was literally untouchable. He became the youngest chef at the time to earn 3 Michelin stars and help transform the perception of chefs from back-of-house labourers into rock stars and iconic figures within culture. His kitchens were well documented for their intensity, verbal abuse, flying plates, and psychological warfare.
You get your act together, boys, for f***'s sake. Come on, you get out the Hey, come here. What the is this shit?
No, I didn't make Gordon Ramsay cry. He made himself cry.
But this volatile environment was also where brilliance was forged, and out of that fire came Gordon Ramsay at the age of 19. He would beat the shit out of me, in a nice way, where you get elbowed and pushed and shoved. That's how you learn. I think Marco saw a bit of himself in me. He was such a mentor. He knew how important my mum was to me and understood how bad my little brother's addiction was. I knew what I wanted, but I hadn't found the right person yet, and Marco was like a big brother.
I think we had similar backgrounds. He lost his mum at a young age, and his father, he didn't have a good relationship. So I think you attach yourself to similar circumstances.
Despite Gordon looking up to Marco like an older brother, he wanted out of Harvey's because it was toxic and a borderline abusive kitchen. But as well, Gordon had outgrown his mentor. He wanted to transition into French cuisine to further his skills. And although the relationship was a bit volatile at that time, Marco advised Ramsay to work for Aubergine as restaurant La Gavroche in London before moving to Paris immediately. This was an essential move for him to get out of Marco's hostile environment and also further develop his cooking under one of the legends of French cuisine. It was here at La Gavroche where Gordon would meet a young Marcus Wareing, his future business partner, sous chef, and best friend. While at high school, Marcus found a natural talent for cooking. This curiosity for the art form then took him to Southport College, where he would do a 3-year course in catering. Life changed when I went to catering college at 16. That took me from being a nowhere school pupil to being the best academic in college. I came first in all of my exams, which was unknown for me. I got a job at the Savoy at 18. It was horrible but extraordinary. I didn't have a group of friends and I lived almost like a monk. My life was just going to work and then coming home to bed, but I was quickly put in positions of responsibility. After years of service, he left the Savoy in 1990. Unsure of where he wanted to go to next, Marcus remembered that he watched a documentary which featured the greatest chefs in the UK, one of which was Aubergine. Now with a vision of working at Gavroche, Marcus was prompted by his dad to knock on their door to get a job.
He said, I want you to get up, have a shower, have a shave, put your best suit on if you've got one, get a jacket on and go and knock on their door. I said, Dad, you can't do that. He said, mate, will you just do that for me? That's Gavroche, mate. I can't go and knock on the Gavroche door. He said, will you just fucking do it? Do it for me and see what happens next. So I did it, knocked on the door. Michelle didn't come up. The head chef came up, Mark Prescott, who happened to be from Wigan. So he's a northerner like me, gave me time. I told him what I wanted. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the post offering me a job. I handed my notice in at the Savoy. Anton Edelman laughed at me and said, you won't survive. And there was the feed. That was just what I needed.
It was his time under the ruse where Marcus would of course first meet Gordon Ramsay. It was this meeting that was a critical step in Marcus's career, as it would transition him from a commis chef to a more senior role within fine dining. From the first moment I met Gordon when I was a 19-year-old trainee chef in the kitchen of La Gavroche, homesick and new to London, he stood out like a sore thumb. He had this total confidence. I was attracted to him immediately.
People like that, watch them, focus on them and go with them. and that was Gordon Ramsay. Big change in my life, that, because he was a game changer in that kitchen, and obviously he became a game changer in my career because that was the chef that stood out from any other chef I'd ever worked with. Out of all the 110 chefs in the Savoy, and Gordon was a people person, and he really had a star quality when it came to the food. He'd just spent 3.5 years with Marco White at Harvey's, the rock and roll kitchen, the kitchen that was unlike no other in anywhere in this country that anyone had ever seen before. And so he came into Gavroche with that training, that tasting, that attention to detail, that perfection on the cutting of the fish, that brilliance of putting food on the plate. Taste. You look around the kitchen, people weren't tasting food, they would just go through a process. And that's the one thing that was a point of difference. So that was when, as I focused on him, I added that into my arsenal. Just kept adding and just loved it. And mimic it, because he was mimicking Marco, but Marco I never had the chance to work with Marco. That kitchen I was not ready for. So I went into Gavroche and saw someone who then left and then went to Paris, and strangely enough we met up 3 years later, and I became the very first chef that he ever employed.
After their time in Gavroche in London, both chefs kind of went on their own world tours to refine their craft. Marcus had stints in restaurants in New York, Amsterdam and then Sussex, where he would go on to meet his wife. Meanwhile, Ramsay was invited to be Albert Roux's #2 at a ski resort for a season, after which he moved to Paris for 3 years to work under Michelin-starred legends Joel Rubicon and Guy Savoy. According to Ramsay, Guy is who he truly regards as his mentor, despite having Marco as a brother. But following the intense and physical demand Gordon had put on himself for years, he then spent a year working as a personal chef on a private yacht based in Bermuda, where he also travelled to Sicily and then Sardinia to learn some aspects of Italian cuisine. After coming back to London in 1993, Ramsay accepted a role leading the kitchen at La Tante Claire in Chelsea, working beneath chef Pierre Kaufmann at the renowned 3 Michelin-star restaurant. Not long after, Marco re-entered Gordon's life and offered to set him up with a head chef position. This led Marco introducing his protégé to his business partners who owned a restaurant in Chelsea called Rossmore. The restaurant was renamed to Aubergine, and the 26-year-old Ramsay was subsequently hired as head chef and given a 25% stake in the restaurant. Now, this was full on the moment that a Padawan graduates into a Jedi Master, and I also imagine the moment where Marco says to Gordon something along the lines of, "With great power comes great responsibility. Don't fuck this up." Gordon's first hire for the restaurant was of course Marcus as his sous chef, and then his other protégé Angela Harnett a year later in 1994.
And I had just stepped into Hell's Kitchen, the best kitchen, better than Harvey's. It was super, and he was absolutely obsessed with it, possessed with perfection and work and customer service. You was just take food to a whole new level. And I've not been in that position before because it was very, very different to Gavroche. Gavroche was an institution and it was set in its stone, it was set in its way. This was brand spanking new, creative cookery at the highest level that was being recognised globally. That was what made that place very, very different. And so there was sort of a colleague/friend there. So when I went to work at the Aubergine, the friendship became boss and pupil. That was harder than the job itself, because I'd seen him laugh. We'd had jokes. I'd been the butt of jokes in the kitchen, and that was like, wow, he's serious. I'm thinking, am I going into this? I didn't know how he was going to run that kitchen. I had no clue, but I didn't realise he was so focused, and not the person I saw at Gavroche. A whole new level.
Within 14 months of the restaurant being open, Aubergine won its first Michelin star. However, in 1995, Wareing left the restaurant for a year to work with Daniel Bouillard in America and follow Gordon's footsteps under Guy Savoy in France. When Marcus returned to the UK, he was given his first head chef role at Aubergine's sister restaurant, Le Orange, which now meant he held stakes in the restaurant alongside Ramsay. By 1997, Aubergine won its second Michelin star. The kitchen was literally boiling over with talent, and it was the it place to be for modern fine dining in London. However, in 1998, an incident took place at the restaurant, which became arguably the biggest rift between Marco and Gordon. You see, at the time, Ramsay had believed that his bosses were looking to replace him with Marco as head chef. So, incredibly, Gordon orchestrated a plan to get a thief to pull up outside the restaurant, dive in, grab the reservation book, and bolt it. This was a serious act of sabotage, because the reservation book is the lifeblood of the restaurant. Without it, the restaurant disappoints customers and its reputation is put in jeopardy. But no one knew who the thief could have been, and while everyone was looking for clues on who it could have been, Gordon blamed the whole thing on Marco. His plan to frame Marco was to make it looked like he was stifling the success of Gordon's restaurant. It was a baseless accusation without any proof. And it wasn't until 2007, almost a decade later, that Gordon admitted to committing the crime. It was me. I nicked it. I blame Marco, because I knew that would fuck him and that would call off the dogs. I still have the book in a safe at home. It was my one stroke of genius, fucking someone over without knowing I was the one who done it. And the restaurant owners cutting Marco off and still wanting to get closer to me, kissing my ass. You always eat that fucking revenge when it's cold, don't you? Trust me, this was stone cold. After this statement, Marco responded, "It bothered me that I'd been accused of theft, but it was totally inconceivable, implausible. What would my gain have been to behave like that?" Marco later threatened legal action against Ramsay and considered a libel case because he blamed Marco for the incident in his autobiography, Humble Pie. So, alongside the paranoia thinking his bosses were going to replace him with White and rumours of trying to turn Aubergine into a chain, Ramsay believed it was time to execute on his dream of owning his own restaurant.
I want my own individuality, and I would like to have a setup where I'm no longer a 33% shareholder. I want it to be 100% individually owned.
The split between Gordon and A to Z Restaurants was also partially because of disputes over Wareing's contract at Le Oranger. This led to A to Z firing Marcus from Le Oranger and then Gordon orchestrating a walkout of the entire staff from both restaurants.
So all the staff always said their career is with Gordon, it's not with A to Z. They're not going to put I worked for A to Z for 2 years on the CV at the end of working for Gordon. They're going to put their work for Gordon Ramsay at the Aubergine restaurant.
This left the restaurants in temporary closure, which subsequently led A to Z Restaurants commencing legal proceedings against Gordon and Marcus for £1 million for breaching their contract and lost in revenue, which was apparently estimated at 15 grand a day. However, the whole thing was eventually settled out of court. He ended his partnership with Aubergine in July 1998 and became a decision he describes as the most important one of his life.
I had a situation once when I had 2 Michelin stars in a restaurant called Aubergine and I'd worked my fucking arse off for these guys for 5 years. And because I didn't want to go down the direction that they were going down, I cut the fucking cord and I got out of it. And it's been the most important fucking day of my entire fucking cooking career.
Shortly after Aubergine, Ramsay bought La Tante Leclerc just up the road, gutted the place and redecorated it all within 4 weeks of leaving Aubergine. Nearly the entire kitchen that worked with him at Aubergine also followed him to Restaurant Ramsay. The new venture cost £1.2 million and was funded by Ramsay's personal savings, a hefty bank loan, his father-in-law and former colleagues at Aubergine.
The main reason why I left the Aubergine was the fact that you don't become a 3-star chef in a large corporate setup. 3 stars, 2-star operations are about individuality, about individual style. I'm still underachieved, I suppose, and I haven't won my 3rd Michelin star, so there's goals to be had and targets to be reached. So that's the target really, 3 Michelin stars.
On the opening night of Ramsay's restaurant, Marcus explained why it was the most important moment of his life.
So this is probably the biggest day of his life because this is him, independent, 100% on his own. And there's only one man that can make a mess of it now, and that's Gordon. And he knows that.
Within 3 years, restaurant Gordon Ramsay achieved 3 Michelin stars, making him the first Scottish chef in history to achieve that feat. However, due to the success of this first restaurant, Gordon managed to raise £1.4 million for the launch of a second restaurant in Chelsea called Petrus in March 1999. The name came from the French wine Chateau Petrus, one of the most prestigious and expensive wines in the world, which just so happens to be Gordon and Wareing's favourite. The name alone signalled confidence, ambition and a taste for the very top. And who else could Ramsay trust as head chef to take it to the top other than his right hand man, Marcus? This was truly a full circle moment of Gordon graduating his protégé in the same way Marco had done for Gordon. At the age of 32 years old, Marcus was given control of the kitchen, and while Gordon's name was up on the door, Petrus quickly became known within the industry as Marcus's restaurant. He was the one leading the line, refining the menus, pushing the standards, and living inside the pressure cooker of daily service. And the results came quickly. Just 7 months after opening, Petrus won a Michelin star. Marcus was becoming a serious force in his own right, alongside Angela Harner as his sous chef, and together they kind of represented the new wave of London fine dining. Yet, beneath this success, a subtle shift was happening. Gordon's profile was exploding globally. TV deals, international openings, brand expansions. He was becoming less of a chef anchored to one kitchen, and more of a bloke building a culinary empire. Marcus, meanwhile, was still grinding through 16-hour days, fully immersed in the craft. So when one partner becomes a global celebrity and the other one remains in the trenches, tensions don't explode overnight. It builds quietly, and by the mid-2000s, that tension was impossible to ignore. As Petrus thrived and won its second Michelin star in 2007, the question of ownership and identity became increasingly complicated. The restaurant carried Ramsay's brand, but its reputation had largely been built by Marcus. Over time, Marcus wanted autonomy and didn't want to be seen as Ramsay's right-hand man, but rather as himself. The breaking point came in 2008, when Marcus attempted to separate and assert control over the restaurant that was now located on Berkeley Street. Following months of rumours, in May, the Berkeley Hotel announced that it would be working directly with Marcus rather than through Gordon Ramsay Holdings, as the lease on Petrus inside the Berkeley was due to lapse later in September of that year. This led Ramsay's company to take legal action and become a bitter and public feud between the three parties. But this wasn't just a business disagreement. This was deeply personal. Ramsay had been the best man at both Marco and Marcus's wedding, and he managed to piss them both off. Gordon and Marcus had risen through the ranks together, side by side, and were now facing each other in court. However, a settlement was eventually reached later in 2008. It resulted in Marcus retaining control of the Berkeley Street site, but was forced to drop the name Petrus. The restaurant was subsequently rebranded as Marcus Wareing at the Berkeley. Meanwhile, Ramsay retained ownership of the Petrus brand itself, but during this period, Marcus talked about how it was financially brutal, and it was all about who had the deepest pockets. And spoiler alert, it was obviously Gordon. If I'd been your average chef, I would have been crushed, because it was all about who had the deepest pockets. I earned a pretty mediocre wage, but luckily I was a great saver and I invested wisely, like my dad taught me to do. Although the business dispute was settled, the friendship was not. At the time, Marcus stated, "If I never speak to that guy again in my life, it wouldn't bother me one bit. Wouldn't give a fuck. I admire Gordon, I learned a lot from him, but I wouldn't lose any sleep over knowing he wouldn't be there. No chance." Gordon loves being the only 3 Michelin star here in London. He's milked it for years. Whatever happens between me and Gordon, if he wants me to never get the status I want, then my advice to him is, put a gun to my head, shoot me, put me in a box and bury me, because if you don't, I'll come back and I'll come back. I'll never give up until I get to where I want to go. In 2009, Gordon reopened Petrus, this time in Knightsbridge. This new Petrus became another jewel within the infinity gauntlet Gordon was building. But a few months before Gordon reopened, Marcus explained why he split ways with Gordon. Competition is healthy, and the next chapter is all about me. Do you know what my biggest fear was when I worked for Gordon? To wake up one day and want to be like him, because that would mean that I was a failure. In the television persona, the amount of restaurants he owns and the Michelin stars he has, in the character stakes, the money he makes, the cars he drives, the suits he wears, the whole thing is bigger, better and greater. But in the end, it was the fear of spending my life in another man's shadow that did it. When you have children, you want to be able to say to them, I stood up and had a go. Now that I've done that, I'm a different person. I was very angry. I didn't like the look of the man I saw in the mirror in the morning or the flavour in my mouth. Now I'm cleansed of it. I've achieved more in the past 12 months than I have in the past 5 years. When I felt like I stopped being creative. I've also made more money this year than in my entire life, and that's because I'm focused. Marcus's new venture won Best Restaurant in London in 2008 and 2009, which subsequently led to a Michelin star the same year. The only comment Gordon made about the lawsuit came during a 2010 interview. I actually feel sorry for Marcus. He's dreamt this big explosion up, but I've got nothing to say. I wish him all the best. However, it wasn't until 2012 when Marcus would come face to face with Gordon after the lawsuit. It was during the London Olympics, and some key people from the food industry were there to meet David Cameron. At the end of the day, Gordon tries to leave first, then I go. And as they're holding the front door, we end up meeting in the corridor downstairs. Just us two, face to face. Very weird. We pass one another, shake hands, say hello, and that's it. No smiles, Surreal actually. A year later, Marcus reflected on his relationship with Gordon and sounded a lot more thankful for the opportunity to learn off his mentor. The two biggest turning points in my life were meeting and breaking up with Gordon Ramsay. He was the best man at my wedding, but we are very different people today. My falling out was never with Gordon, it was always the company. Without him, I would not be who I am today. He is an amazing leader and I miss him in a strange way. You love it, but you know it's not good for you. Somewhere down the line, you're going to get fat. I think the fact that Marcus mentions that they are just two very different people and have slightly different philosophies when it comes to cooking kind of reflects how Gordon felt under Marco. My kitchen is not a swearing ground, it's discipline. There is a line of respect for food and the job that you do not cross. If you cut a corner, you better have a good reason. There is a Jekyll and Hyde. As I go further down the line, you see less of a nutcase. But that cracking point is in every chef worth his salt. During a 2019 interview, Marcus revealed that it was actually him who picked the fight with Gordon all those years back. Listen, you must understand, it was me who started it with Gordon. I picked a fight. I no longer wanted to be kept in a corner, moaning and feeling like I had nothing to offer his business. So I spoke up, and well, it got nasty. I wanted to run my own future, and I'll kick sand in your face until you tell me to fuck off. Did Ramsay care? No. He was all over the world like Mick fucking Jagger. What did he care about me? One thing I do know is that none of us would look back at any of that time with any regret. Massive learning curve for both of us. Ours is a great story. Like Marco and Gordon, amazing times, and I certainly wouldn't be sitting here without Gordon. So I have a huge amount of respect for that. What he has is unique and you have to admire it. But to know the real Gordon, to know the real cook underneath all that other stuff, the business, the television, the personality, was to know the man that ran Aubergine all those years ago. I know that man. It was a very special space. The hottest kitchen this country has ever produced. Iconic. Ramsay and Aubergine took the London food scene and totally revolutionised it, and that will never be done again. Pretty cool, right? In 2023, during a podcast interview, Gordon reacted to a clip of Marcus describing the impact he had on him during their time spent together.
And that's the one thing that was a point of difference. So that was when, as I focused on him, I added that into my arsenal. Just kept adding and adding and adding and just loved it. And mimic it. Because he was mimicking Marco. But Marco was I never had the chance to work with Marco.
How? Yeah, interesting. Yeah, mimicking is a good word. I mean, I suppose I was grateful and fortunate that I was given that uniqueness from him. And that's going back to what you said earlier about the arrogance. That's why it is, in many ways, it looks, oh my God, how cocky is he? No, trust me, there's a price to pay for success. You can't buy it, but you can be taught it.
Now, although in that clip Gordon didn't really mention Marcus or their feud, a few years later in February 2025, after more than 16 years with their knives out for each other, Marcus and Gordon reunited for a make-up dinner, which resulted in Ramsay saying, "Dinner with friends." Together, Gordon and Marcus revolutionised London fine dining and handled the heat in the hottest kitchens in Britain: Gavroche, Aubergine, Petrus. It was two young chefs against the world, until that world got bigger. Marcus didn't want to wake up one day and realise he spent his life in another man's shadow, and Gordon, whether intentionally or not, had become the very thing he once resented: the mentor, the giant, the man whose shadow swallowed everything. So maybe success isn't all about who ends up with the most stars. It's about surviving the fire without losing yourself completely. And in the end, the greatest chefs don't just master their stove, they learn when to put the knives down. Anyway, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching this video, it really does mean a lot to me. Make sure to go follow me over on Instagram @PhatMema, and while you're still here, like this video, subscribe, and comment below what you want to see next. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.